You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Ethan Hristodoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Hristodoulou, and today I am diving into the NFC North defenses and ranking them from worst to first, going over the Vikings, Lions, Packers, and Bears. Oh my, there's plenty to discuss. I'm sure this one will be just as controversial as my offensive power rankings were for this same division, so make sure you comment down below your rankings and your thoughts and opinions on mine. But beginning with the very first team at the very bottom, the number 4, I am going with the Minnesota Vikings. Now, there's a good couple of reasons for this, but the biggest one really just has to do with some of the changes that are going on throughout the entirety of this defense, whether you're talking somewhere along the front 7 all the way back to the secondary. There is just a lot of changes going on this year, and the defense, to be honest, wasn't too great last year either. So with that, it's just one of those things where I'm in a position of I just have to kind of see it to really believe it in terms of the improvements made this season. But looking at the front 7 here, coming in from Green Bay, the Vikings went and signed Dean Lowry. He's set to play left defensive end, and along with, I believe it is Khyiris Tonga, I could be saying that wrong, is set to play nose tackle. So 2 new guys on the D-line starting there. Tonga was on the roster last season, but he was not starting. And then Harrison Phillips, even though he was a starter last year, appears to be flipping sides now. He's going to be playing right defensive end as Dean Lowry slots in on the left side there. Then you couple that with the fact that you have Marcus Davenport joining from New Orleans as well. He's going to be playing opposite of Danielle Hunter. So there's just a lot of movement and changing going on as far as the front 7 is concerned here. However, it is a really good group of guys, so that is going for them. It's not like I'm sitting here writing them off. I mean, you look at Danielle Hunter and the 10.5 sacks, 34 pressures he had last season. I mean, I'm not too worried about it. And Marcus Davenport is kind of like one of those flyer pickups where he didn't have necessarily a great season last year. His production actually kind of tanked off last season. But when you look back to what he was able to do the year prior, he had himself 9.5 sacks, nearly 10 there. He had 9 tackles for loss and over 20 pressures as well. So, I mean, pretty strong group of guys there, and even your interior guys are good at that. And then you look at some of the guys behind their edge rushers there in DJ Wonnum, who had an 8-sack season in 2021. Patrick Jones had himself 4 sacks last year. So, I mean, you have a pretty deep group of guys, a really strong group of guys, just so much changing and movement going on. So it's one of those things where it's like, I'm going to have to see the production from this unit before I can really buy in. Then as far as the linebacking corps go, following that same theme, you're losing Eric Kendricks, longtime linebacker Eric Kendricks, one of the better drop back, I almost said cover corners, linebackers in the NFL. So you have Jordan Hicks, who's still obviously there with the team. Not quite the cover guy that Kendricks is, but he is serviceable and he does a lot of his damage up at the line of scrimmage. But then you have a guy like Brian Asamoah, who's stepping up this season, and he only had 119 snaps last year. So a lot to take on for a young guy who doesn't really have a ton of snaps to his name so far in the NFL. So big shoes to fill. Some curiosity as to how that plays out as far as the linebacking room goes. And then again, the same thing in the secondary. A lot of changing, familiar faces, but there's also a lot of changing going on here. But I will say it does look like it's going to be at least an upgraded group from what we got last year. You went and drafted USC cornerback Mekhi Blackman in the 3rd round, and he's set to start at right cornerback, which is awesome for the team to hit on a corner in the 3rd round that they feel comfortable with and starting so soon. Then you have a Caleb Evans, who's going to be set to play opposite of him. In 10 games last year, he allowed a 64% completion percentage, couple of passes defense, and only a touchdown allowed. And then you bring in Byron Murphy from Arizona, who had a really strong 2021, but ended up missing 8 games last year. So hopefully he can come back healthy and be a big improvement for you at the nickelback spot there. And then you look at some of the depth behind them. You obviously have Andrew Booth Jr., and then on top of that, you have Jay Hayward that you grabbed in the 4th round this year. So a strong group altogether. And again, this is a group that I feel, as far as the cornerback room goes, is an upgrade over what you had last season. And even in the safety spot, this is one of those things where you're kind of sitting on a 1st-round pick from last year who literally took 2 snaps in 2022, so you're hoping to end up seeing him play more this year in Lewis Sign. But then you have Cameron Bynum, who was phenomenal for the team last season. In nearly 1,200 snaps, he allowed only a 66% completion percentage, couple of interceptions, 6 passes defensed, really strong showing from him. And then, of course, longtime playmaker Harrison Smith, who is still leading that secondary there. So this is a group that, again, a lot of change changing going on, even if it's just new faces from new places, or it's guys that are familiar faces playing in new places. So it's one of those things where I just kind of have to see it. And based off of what I saw from the team last year, I don't want to go in and like set my expectations too high and have it kind of fall flat on their faces. So this is why I have Minnesota at number 4. I'm not saying that this group can't be better than where I have them, but right now, just based off of how I've looked at the entire NFC North, this is where I feel the Vikings fit best, at least at the very moment. Then you dive into the number 3 team here, and I am looking at the Chicago Bears. Now, I had a really tough time deciding where I was going to slot Chicago, but I put them at number 3 for kind of the same reason as the Minnesota Vikings. However, I believe in the talent just a little bit more in Chicago. Now, the Bears are seeing a ton of new starters coming into this season compared to what they had last year. I felt like as I was going through this year, I was just like new guy, and they're all set to start. So you're bringing in a lot of talent, and honestly, with what I'm seeing from this group of guys that they brought in, I firmly believe that this defense has got to be better than what they fielded last year. It just has to be. There is so much talent being brought in. You have DeMarcus Walker, who had 7 sacks last season. He's going to be pairing himself up with Yannick Ngakoue, who had himself 9.5 sacks last year as well, 27 pressures on top of that. This is a unit that could really use some production from their edge rushers. They had only 20 sacks and 85 pressures altogether last year, worst in both of those categories there. So this is something that is much welcome. I think Yannick Ngakoue makes a lot of sense here in Chicago. Then as far as the interior goes, you have a guy like Andrew Billings joined the team this offseason. Justin Jones appears to be basically the lone starter on that defensive line from last season. Overall, you're looking at 3 new guys and Justin Jones. So a lot of reworking going on there as far as the D-line goes, but I do think that this group has got to be more talented than what they fielded last year. Even with like some of the depth guys that you're looking at, you have 3rd-round pick Zach Pickens, 2nd-round pick Jervon Dexter Sr., and you also went and brought in Rasheem Green as well, who's a solid guy for depth. Like there's just this unit as a whole, the entire defensive front has got to be better. You look at the linebacking corps, another group filled with changes here, but positive changes, and honestly, I would say like plus positive changes here. You look at your weak side linebacker in TJ Edwards joining the fold from Philadelphia. Your Mike linebacker is going to be Tremaine Edmonds joining from Buffalo here. Those are 2 guys that are 100+ tackle guys. Both of them can drop back effectively. Both of them can help in the run. They can even bring some pressure and get to the quarterback. That is huge additions for the middle of your defense there. So love to see that. You have undrafted free agent from last year, linebacker Jack Sanborn, a guy who looked really good from weeks 9 to 14 before he went down with injury. He had 59 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, a couple of sacks to boot. I really like the starting linebacking group here in Chicago, and I really think they're going to surprise some people here, especially Jack Sanborn. He's a guy that I was really high in on the draft last year going into it, and to see him go into Chicago, which is like perfect place for him to go and stand out the way he did in the limited action that he got to see when he was really getting some play time, has me excited for what he's going to be able to do in year 2. And then even like your depth guys are pretty solid. You have Dylan Cole, Michael Walker, you got Noah Sewell in the 5th round as well. Quality depth behind a really good group of starters, or at least projected starters. I really like the linebacking core of the Bears. Then as for the secondary, this is one of those units where they're competing for one of the better secondaries in the NFC North right now, and they could arguably be the best group altogether. As far as like the very back of that secondary is concerned, Jaquan Brisker paired with Eddie Jackson, love this group. Do not really have to dive into it too much. I think Jaquan Brisker was phenomenal in his rookie season. You look at his stat line, 104 tackles, 4 sacks. He had an interception, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery, and the Bears could literally line him up wherever they need to be. He is an ascending star at safety and a guy that I think in the next couple of years could be in the conversation for a top 5 safety in the NFL. I love his game. I love the effort that he brings to the table. His versatility is second to none. He is an absolute dog in that secondary, and pairing him up with Eddie Jackson, who has been as consistent as they come for the time that he's been in the NFL, really like the safety tandem there. And then a young, albeit very talented group of guys as far as the cornerback room is concerned. We're looking at Kyler Gordon, rookie season. He had 3 interceptions, 6 passes defense. Completion percentage was a little bit high, but overall a really good showing for the first year man. But my biggest like takeaway from his game last year, and something that it's not something you get to say about everyone, but I'm happy to see it with Kyler Gordon, his willingness to get in there, mix it up, and make the tackles. 71 tackles last year, high number for corner, and you love to see it. Not a lot of corners like to make the tackle. They love to play coverage. They love to do their thing and disrupt wide receivers. But when it comes to actually bringing guys down, you see some corners, they hesitate. They're not, not necessarily the biggest guys on the field. They're not always trying to get in there and mix it up that way. But to see Kyler Gordon do it, I'm sure Bears fans, you guys would agree with me. Love to see it from him. Jalen Johnson didn't load up the stat sheet, but again, another guy who had a really strong 2022. He allowed just under 66% completion percentage. And you have second round pick from Miami, Tyreek Stevenson, coming in as well. And even the depth guys that you have here, Jalen Jones, 5th round pick out of Minnesota, Terrell Smith, Josh Blackwell coming in from Philadelphia. You have a really solid core of young and athletic, talented, just guys that I honestly think have a real shot at making a big improvement this year, especially with an improved pass rush, and could be fighting for that spot as the best secondary in the NFC North. Really big on just the additions that Chicago has done overall, but there is the big thing that is keeping me from really going all in on the defense, and that is just so many additions that I like, but are they all going to be hits? Most likely, probably not. There's going to be a guy or two who probably does not fit in schematically, but I'm a really big fan of just about everyone that they chose to bring in this offseason. It's just a matter of, can we take all these guys and make it work into a really good, strong, functioning defense? Going into my number 2 team, though, at the number 2 spot, a team that I expect to see a really big improvement from this season, and that's going to be the Detroit Lions at number 2. This is a group, especially in the secondary, that made what I would say are some of the best improvements, but not too many improvements, but really good improvements to help take a unit that was pretty much dead last in the NFL when it came to just about passing defense as a whole. And I'm really excited to see their progression. But before we get into that, looking at the defensive front, solid group, I think, is poised to take another step forward this year. Aiden Hutchinson looking to double down on a really strong rookie campaign where he had nearly 10 sacks, 30 pressures. He had 9 tackles for loss. Really good first year for him, the Michigan native as well. John Kaminsky's opposite of him in 8 starts last year. He had 4 sacks, 17 pressures, and 5 TFLs himself. And then you're looking at a guy like Romeo Okwara, who had 10 sacks in 2020, but just has not been healthy since. So you're hoping for a healthy season from him so you can help fortify that group up front there. And then when you look at the guys that are on the interior here, you have Aleem McNeil and then Isaiah Buggs, both on the inside there, can bring some pressure. They can swallow up the run. Then you have a guy like 3rd round pick out of Western Kentucky, Broderick Martin as well. And you have a really strong defensive front here, and one that I really like, and one that I think is going to, again, improve with more experience and with some hopefully improved health as well. As far as the linebacking corps goes, this is a unit that was already starting to shine last season and got a massive upgrade this offseason via the draft here. So you have Alex Anzalone and Charles Harris returning. They're going to play weak side linebacker and strong side linebacker respectively. But then you bring in 1st round pick Jack Campbell, who's set to play that Mike spot, and he is like the final piece, I feel like, of the linebacking group puzzle here, because those are your 3 starters and they all looked really good last year, but even the depth behind them. Malcolm Rodriguez was like a Detroit Lions preseason hero to a guy that went from being like a fringe roster player to a legit dude on that linebacking group there. Then you have Derek Barnes and James Houston as well for the depth to round things out, and the linebacking corps is possibly the deepest in the NFC North. I would honestly say probably. It more than likely is. There is just so much to like about all 6 of those guys as a group. It's really hard to argue against them right now. And if Jack Campbell pans out the way that I think he's going to, I know a lot of people question the Detroit Lions going after a middle linebacker so early in the draft when people were thinking, there's other areas of need. But Jack Campbell is a guy that I'm very high on, really excited to see how he does in Detroit. And I really don't think he's going to be disappointing anybody. And then as for the secondary, like I was saying, a group that just did not look great this past season. Top 10 in touchdowns allowed per game. They were 3rd in yards allowed per game in 2022, but they did a really good job of bringing in some guys that I think are going to be difference makers here. You look at the secondary, they went and signed Cameron Sutton from Pittsburgh, who I think can kind of step in and just play that cornerback one role for you right out of the gates. Then you also look at Emmanuel Mosley. He's actually somebody that I selected as my breakout player for San Francisco last year, but ultimately going down to injury, did not get to have that breakout year. Might start off a little bit slow, but I think he has a really high ceiling and potential, and one that I think he can reach. And in Detroit, with the opportunity he has here, he might just be able to reach it. Because again, you're playing with a guy like Cameron Sutton, along with CJ Gardner-Johnson as well, who, interestingly enough, slotted in at nickelback with Brian Branch behind him. But those are guys that you can line up in a number of different places on the defense here. So I guess that's probably just like on paper where you're going to start them. But I mean, CJ Gardner-Johnson, he can line up pretty much anywhere in the secondary, and Brian Branch was praised as a guy who could pretty much do the same thing as well. So I kind of like that that's where they're listed as far as the depth chart is concerned here. But with so much talent, so much to like as far as your starting core of guys goes, or just guys that I expect to see get the most snaps as far as the cornerbacks are concerned, or just in those cornerback positions, really like the group there altogether. Again, a lot of changes, but overall, really excited about them because it's going to be a better unit than what they fielded last year. It has to be. It's another one of those situations where it just has to be better. As far as the safeties are concerned, Joseph Kirby, a strong safety, really good year in 2022. 4 interceptions, 8 passes defense. He had a couple of forced fumbles, 62.5% completion percentage. Really strong year from him. You're getting Tracy Walker, the third back, as well at free safety. He only ended up playing in 3 games last year before missing the rest of the season. And then you have Ifeatu Melifonwu as your number 3 safety. Solid 98 snaps last season, but should be a good guy to just be able to rely on whenever one of their 2 starting safeties needs a spell. But overall, again, this is a Detroit Lions group that I think has a really high ceiling. There's a lot of youth on this roster, but a lot of talented youth. And some of the guys have already proven themselves in other places or have already proven themselves already in Detroit. And I really feel just something is brewing in Detroit. And, I caught a lot of flack for my offensive power rankings and where I put Detroit in there for the NFC North. If you haven't checked that out, highly recommend you go do so when this is done. But this is a Detroit Lions team that is like right here. They are ready to ascend. There's a lot of hype around them. The NFL even bought into them. I'm somewhat bought in. I still need to see it to believe it, but this is a team that looked really strong offensively last year, and I think this defense is finally poised to make a little bit of a catch-up and make it a more balanced team effort as opposed to just relying on the offense to dump points on their opponents. And then, of course, the number 1 spot here, we're looking at the Green Bay Packers. The main reason I have them sitting at number 1 has just got to do with, 1, the amount of talent they have, but 2, just the consistency of all the people that are on their starting core, and even the guys that you have as far as depth goes as well. And that's one thing about the Green Bay Packers that I really, really like about them. And they've kind of at least projection-wise, they've kind of flipped now. They went from being the high-powered offensive team to now they're pretty much strong on the defensive side with a really young core on the offense here. But, I mean, up front, you have new starters, yes, but they're guys that have already been in the system here. TJ Slayton and Devontae Wyatt are moving into starting roles now, replacing Jaron Reed and Dean Lowry from last season. Kenny Clark, obviously a staple since 2016 on the unit, will be leading this young pair on the interior there. You have Preston Smith and Rashawn Gary fighting on the edges there against those offensive lines there. Rashawn Gary obviously missing 8 games last season, so hopefully a healthier Rashawn Gary, a guy who can actually play, should help increase the pass rush and pressure that you can put on these quarterbacks that you're going to be going against, because you don't necessarily know what you're going to get offensively this year. Things have looked good so far for the Packers in the preseason, but we won't really know the truth until we kick off and get the regular season rolling. But overall, a really good group up front there. You also have guys like first-round pick Lucas Van Ness and undrafted free agent Brenton Cox Jr., who impressed the coaches with his work ethic. I remember reading about how impressed they were with him, waiting in the wings behind them. And overall, a really strong front 7. And again, you have a little bit of turnover, but they're guys that have been there. And Devontae Wyatt was drafted last year with the intention that he's probably going to be a starter sooner rather than later, and his time is now. So I'm pretty excited to see how he pans out for Green Bay. As far as the linebacking corps goes, this is a pairing that I'm a really big fan of, and my only real concern is just Quay Walker. Quay Walker's a guy that, when he got drafted by Green Bay, was not really high on the selection. And I know there's a lot of people that were like that. I didn't really think it was the right move for them, but it's turned out he's a very talented player and he's done a really good job. It's just he keeps getting himself ejected from games. So if we can avoid the ejections, he's a 100-plus tackle guy. He can drop back in coverage as well and even chase down the quarterback. Quay Walker's a star in the making, as long as he's not getting kicked out of the game. And then you're pairing with Devondre Campbell, who's another 100-tackle guy, good in coverage, can stop the run. You know, he has 4 ints in the last 2 seasons since he's been in Green Bay. Honestly, he's gotten better in coverage, I feel, since he's come to Green Bay. But overall, excellent pairing between those two guys. And then you have a secondary that is, I would say, strong. Little bit of concern as far as the safety room is concerned, but this is, again, if you're arguing most talented secondary in the NFC North, it's probably between these guys and the Chicago Bears right now. And it's just a matter of, like, do you like the youth and upside of Chicago, or do you like the experience and star power that they have in Green Bay? When you look at this secondary, you're looking at a group led by Jair Alexander in his 6th season now, coming off of a really strong 2022 season with a lot of people that were doubting him coming off of that injury. But 5 interceptions, 60% completion percentage. He had 14 passes defense last year. Jair is back, and he's reminded everyone just how damn good he is, and I'm glad to see it. Now, you are dealing with Eric Stokes missing some time here, so that is causing a little bit of a shift as far as just what your initial cornerback room as far as starters is going to look. But, I mean, you have Rasul Douglas, who's apparently slated to start opposite of him. Probably one of my favorite stories in the NFL right now, being kicked off the Arizona Cardinals practice squad of all places and winding up in Green Bay and becoming a starter for them. You love to see it. It kind of feels like a very Cardinals-esque situation, if you ask me. And then you have Keyshawn Nixon, who's getting the nod to play in the slot, an all-pro return man for the team last year. He had only 4 starts in 2022, but he's getting the nod in the slot there. So big duty for him, but they're waiting on Eric Stokes to get back here. Hopefully he can battle back from that injury. We're not going to see him for at least the very first 4 games of the season, potentially more. Just depends on how, you know, his recovery is going from that foot knee issue he's dealing with. And then you have guys like Valentine Carrington and Anthony Johnson Jr., guys that are probably going to see some more playing time than you would have liked, at least initially, because of the Eric Stokes injury. So that'll be something you have to keep an eye on whenever they're substituting out for some of the other guys, if they maybe need a break here or there. And then the safety room, like I said, this is where, like, I guess a little bit of concern comes into play here, because you are losing Adrian Amos. He left this offseason. Rudy Ford is going to get the nod to start opposite of Darnell Savage, who's pretty much a do-it-all, line him up anywhere kind of safety. But Rudy Ford had 6 starts last season, pretty much the most productive of his career to this point. He had 3 picks, 3 passes defense. He had 3 touchdowns allowed as well, though. So a little bit of question as to how his game is going to translate into a full-time starting role, if that's going to be the case going forward. But overall, when I look at the Green Bay Packers right now, this is just a very well-established unit that has a lot of star power, a lot of high-profile guys that have been in the system for a long time, and they're the most well-established defense, in my opinion. So hence why I have them as the number 1 team in the NFC North. But those are my power rankings for the defenses, again, in the NFC North. Comment your thoughts and opinions on my thoughts and opinions, and be sure to share your power rankings as well. But that is it for me. I appreciate it if you made it to the end of the video. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.